So, you know, we're at a very beautiful masjid and mosque. It's one of the more attractive ones in the Muslim world. But there is one thing in here that I always like coming to see, which is just the traditional mood that reminds me of our ancestors. And when I say our ancestors, I'm not just thinking of Egyptians or of Muslims, but I'm thinking of humanity. I'm very much into looking to the past for wisdom. And I feel that when I'm in places like these, the issues I'd like to talk about usually have to do with what brings us together and our common ground and why we're all here and just the big questions, kind of the ultimate questions. And the questions that in reality we probably have very similar answers to, but only semantics divide us. I think that since the context is one of religion, the key words that always come up are truth, however that may be defined in your mind, it still is a form of truth. The most staunch anti-theist, as some atheists would like to be called, or atheist, would still say that they believed that the truth was there was no God. And I actually prefer that to kind of a agnosticism that is more of an intellectual laziness than it is because of a conviction, where I don't know and I don't want to know. I actually respect a lot more those who consider even their anti-theism or their atheism as a pursuit of truth. Just that whatever really is the case is truth. That's, I think, the definition of truth that almost everyone would agree to. And in that sense, we all believe in a form of truth. And we also all believe in a form of beauty. And again, we can have very different tastes and very different definitions, outward and inward beauty, but we somehow have this idea, that which inclines the soul to it and attracts it and wakes up this desire to enjoy and experience and be grateful one way or the other. And we all have a belief one way or another in justice. Again, it varies greatly, what we think is just and what isn't, and what society should do and what society shouldn't do. Now, it is in this context that I can speak about Islam, because I think that the modern world has done a lot of injustice to religion because religion has done a lot of injustice to the modern world. So it's almost like a reciprocative relationship. Fine, if this is what you're about, this is what the modern world tells religion, you know, whatever the inferiority of women or something sick like that, or killing people in the name of God or something sick like that, which is, again, not truth, not beauty, not justice, not good at all. It's very antithetical to these. Because of atrocities committed in the name of religion, we are no longer drinking from the well of religion. And this is not just in the Western world, where you can see the reaction as great as it may possibly be, because the reaction in the West, Europe and the Americas, kind of North America included, is quite heavy. It's not as heavy as it is here or in the East or in the Far East or the Near East or even the Middle East. And so, but that said, even in this part of the world, we have an allergy to religion. Everyone is worried about religion is just being used badly, all over the place. There's this famous saying, they say it's German. Anyone here with German origins? No? Well, you don't have to make yourself known. I deliberately looked away from her just so I don't have a DNA bias. But basically, I was going to say, what brought us to Germany?
Yeah, I wonder.
The saying, thank you. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's made its way to America safely. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I think that we've thrown a lot of the baby out in religion as humanity with the bathwater, which had to be thrown out. All the injustice, all the ugliness, all the untruth, and the falsity, and all these things, and the evil that's done in its name. And so, I think it's time that humanity kind of stops reacting to religion and starts thinking actively again. Well, you know, chicken soup does work after all. Grandma was right. No matter what we do with antibiotics, whatever, it still works. There is some wisdom to tradition, and let's see what these guys have to say. It is in that context that Islam will have a lot to say, because as Muslims, and now I have to speak from within the faith, I can tell you what we believe our own faith is. And right off the bat, we believe it to be a continuation of all the other faiths. We don't have this exclusivity where we have something and no one else has it. The Quran, the Holy Quran, is very explicit about it being a continuation that confirms those faiths that had been revealed before it. What is Islam really about? We haven't even gone there yet. Islam, according to Muslims and the Quran, as one scholar put it, all Islam really has to offer is God. Nothing else. It has nothing else to give you. And as one Arab scholar had said, "Man wajad Allah, madha faqad." Whoever finds God, what have they lost? وَمَنْ فَقَدَ اللَّهِ مَاذَا وَجَدْ. And whoever loses God, what have they found? By genuinely understanding to their faith, Muslims have always understood Islam as giving you God, giving you absolute truth, giving you absolute certainty. And that is why the most defining feature of Islam is La ilaha illallah, that there is no God but Allah. It's a negation first, like our friends do, but then it's an affirmation. Illallah. And so the third level of Islam is not only believing in La ilaha illallah, there is no God, no absolute, but the one absolute, but the one creator, but living it. Not just outwardly, by adhering to certain laws and praying on time and being good to people and taking care of the climate and the environment, that's good. But you could be insincere about that. You could be lying, you could be doing it for pragmatic purposes. In psychology we study there's extrovert religious people, there's extrinsic religious people, and there's intrinsic religious people. And extrinsic religiosity is when you do it for friendship or for others, or so it's not genuine. Where intrinsic is you really believe it. And to be intrinsically Muslim, which is the third and last level, is to truly believe in this, not only outwardly, but inwardly, to the point that you, as the one hadith, a prophetic saying has it, God becomes the eyes with which you see, the ears with which you hear, the hands that you pick things up with or let them go, and the feet upon which you walk. And what that really means in a deeper sense is that you are conscious of God at all times. And what Darwinism did is it got rid of a historically contingent definition of God. That's how we see it. That's how a Muslim sees it. There are many ways to understand God the creator or God the designer. And prior to these discoveries, we had a kind of fallacious understanding of how we were designed. And it was just kind of the more logical one. It just seemed like, well, we must have been created separately, and it's a cute way of seeing the world. And we make these mistakes in science all the time. And so, without studying it. And then what happened was we discovered certain things that are still contentious and others that seem to be facts. That's the reality to Darwinism, if you're not going to be fundamentalist about it as well. And those things that really seem to be facts, and a lot of them are, just seem to be very different from how we thought God was designing. Now, there are two conclusions you can draw from that. One is, well, God didn't design us. The other is, God didn't design us the way we thought God designed us. So as Muslims, we just go to the second one. And it's a more sophisticated understanding of design. The argument from design, again, for those who study these things, is not dead, but it's had a makeover. And after Darwinism, I just think that one is more accurate, honestly. I mean, I personally believe in the deeper one. And we make these kind of mistakes all the time. But the idea is, if you have a bias towards atheism from the start, if you there's different kinds of atheists. There are those who really are truth seekers. Abductive reasoning is when a phenomenon has two possible equally logical interpretations, but you have an interest in this one being right. And so as soon as the evidence, which has two ways to go, emerges, you jump at one and you say, that's it, I have what I have. And I think that a lot of neo-Darwinists have done that, as opposed to some really cool ones that you can read for, who are quite honest and they tell you, look, this is what we know, this is what we don't know. It's challenging to faith, but you could respond like that, and ultimately you can't scientifically prove whether God exists or doesn't exist. That's the reality, at least thus far. The truth is you can't prove either. And I think it was intended to be that way, because otherwise more intelligent people would have had a head start And that doesn't seem quite just on God's part. So the question is, how does Islam balance the idea of free will with the sovereignty of God, and I guess also with the omnipotence of God, with God kind of having power over all things? Well, the idea is God can do anything, including create a being that he won't control. It's just as simple as that. That's one of the fruits of omnipotence. And so it's not seen as contradictory in any way. And then that's as far as creating a willful being. Independent of God. But then the deeper question always comes in, well, what if God knew my fate? And I mean, many philosophers have settled that ages ago. You know, I really recommend C.S. Lewis's The Screwtape Letters. Has anyone read that? That's just awesome. And that's how religion, I mean, if you're going to talk about religion, he set a standard now, and that's how you're going to talk, or just sit on the bench. Because you have to be entertaining. And for those who don't know, it's this beautiful book. C.S. Lewis, you know, famous, world-renowned late author. And he wrote a book about the devil, a senior devil, teaching his nephew, a junior devil, how to tempt human beings. And then in that fictitious context, he had, you know, well, he'll give you all these tricks that people of faith believe are real. Part of which is how these other beings that exist, that we can see, they can see us, but we can't see them. For a while, these things seemed like facts to human beings, you know, back in history. And then we made some discoveries that made it seem like all that was science fiction. But then we made more discoveries with modern physics that made it seem that they're not so far-fetched after all. Has anyone seen The Elegant Universe? Brian Greene? It's all about kind of the string theory and a whole bunch of superstring theory and kind of how other worlds can actually exist in parallel, and you don't have to see them, and there's nothing far-fetched about that. You can theoretically prove that. But again, some people have an interest in saying that's not true, so that religion can be a farce and that things can be religious, as Bill Mayer had it, and then ultimately we can live a life free of moral restraint, which is what we all desire deep down. But religion is saying, don't live a life free of moral restraint, because you'll be happier once you tread the moral path. It just hurts at first.
How do you try to reconcile modernity with tradition? In other words, how do you keep tradition alive and move into the modern age as a practicing Muslim?
Very easy. I walk around with this, and I wear it. It's a traditional thing. No, I mean, yeah, I was going to wear it today.
What is it? Tell us what it is.
Oh, this is just headgear. Rappers wear it all the time. I'll keep it on. The failure to be contemporary and to live your age by some religionists, if you will, is usually because we're not traditional enough to be contemporary. So what we do is we hold on to, unnecessarily, these interpretations of faith that our ancestors probably would have let go of. There really isn't anything in religion itself, the way I've seen it, at least I can speak for Islam, which is what I study, that goes anything against, in any way, the basics of being a modern human being living in today's world. Now, if you want to adopt other philosophies, like postmodern philosophies, that tell you there is no morality and they want to kind of rub that in, then you're no longer being just a modern guy who lives their time, you're also adopting another philosophy. Immanuel Kant, the philosopher, said, there will be a time where, I'm not sure he used the word globalization, but he kind of predicted that, because we'll get so much better at transportation and at communication that we'll be suddenly all exposed to each other. And that's a terrifying experience. Humanity has not lived like that before. So as a reaction, what people do is they, quote, hurtle back into their ideological caves to kind of feel psychological defense, model. And in doing that, a lot of us hold on to baggage, and that baggage is not from religion, at least I can speak as a Muslim. And by holding on to it, it's hard to be contemporary. But there's no need for that, and I think with time, these things will be let go. A lot of American Muslims, or Muslim Americans as well, I think have been able to make that leap quicker than over here, because there is no autocracy and there's more freedom of religion and things, so they've had catalysts all around them.
I'm curious to know what you think about the role of fear and guilt playing in religion. You see that a lot, especially in Western religions. I'm not sure about Islam, but if you don't believe in God, you're going to hell, you'll burn in infamy, and all of these kind of things. How do those play, and how should they play?
it's a reality. It's terrible. Whether fear or guilt, fear and or guilt, both of them. I think it's just a reflection of a dark soul that embodies religion, or takes on religion, and then tells the world, I am that religion, I represent that faith. But what they're actually disseminating to the world is their own psychological problems, but they come out in the masked by the faith that they believe in. Actually, in other faiths that I've studied, but particularly Islam, which I study more intensively, that makes Islam fear-based in any way. There is fear, but it's always counterbalanced with greed in God's mercy and just the love of God as well. And that's what Sufism was all about, for example. For Islam to give birth to Sufism is pure testimony to how love is much more fundamental than anything else. And fear and greed in God's mercy and fear of God's wrath are just seen as medication, that at a certain position where you're about to kill someone, for example, it's good to fear God. You know, if you don't fear God, you won't care. You know, ask Ted Bundy or someone like that. Or if you don't feel guilty about killing one guy the first time, then you might do it again. So fear and guilt, there's healthy fear and guilt, and there's neurotic fear and guilt. And I think the source-based fear and guilt in Islam and other faiths are the healthy kind, whereas the neurotic kind is just followers. Followers tend to have that problem, but they impose it on religion. We do a lot of that when we study psychology and religion at the university, and a lot of tests as to, is this from the faith or from the person? And so far the results are all, this guy had it in him, whether he was a Muslim, a Christian, a Buddhist, an agnostic, or an atheist. He had that problem, but because he happens to be religious in that way, it's correlated to that religion.
How accepted is the way you talk about Islam in this community?
The good news, it's a lot more accepted by the internet generation, which is becoming the generation. I mean, their impact is clear. This revolution wouldn't have happened without the internet generation. So these guys are powerful. These guys are increasing in number. And these guys are sick of that useless alternative and interpretation that is just so self-based, fear-based, guilt-based, unphilosophical, doesn't have any way of, you know, can't deal with the contemporary world, just kind of a neurotic, so we called it the negative identity, kind of the reactionary kind of hi, I feel threatened by my Western counterparts and by my dictators, so I'm going to react by being fundamentalist interpretation. That's just, it's not working. And if you think about it, I mean, for those who read history, it hasn't been that long. I mean, you know, every religion has had its fair share of zealots and zealotry and these things, but the idea for zealotry to kind of grow into slowly becoming a form of mainstream isn't that old. And, you know, I mean, those who would want to say the most would say 300 years, those who want to say the least would say about 120 or less. And so in the age of a civilization, 120 to 300 years isn't that old, especially this civilization, it's quite ancient. And so I think it was a reaction to certain conditions. I think January 25 has begun the end of that condition, the condition in which Muslims and Arabs just were reactionary. So I have a lot of faith, and I'm quite optimistic that given the new political conditions and given the failure, proven failure of these other interpretations, that the more, I don't even like the word moderate because it implies that we're compromising, but the more genuine interpretation, the one more true to the tradition and more true to the sources, should eventually prevail. And because post-Jan 25, hopefully there will be a chance to really be without the meddling of other administrations and without the meddling of dictators.
Let's hope so.
Let's hope so. Amen. Well, thank you for listening. You guys are wonderful listeners. Thank you very, very much.